I just got back from a meditation retreat in Costa Rica last night, and it was a really wonderful time. But it's funny because I so desperately wanted to be here with you this morning, and yet because of the way my travel plans were set up, it was kind of a tight schedule because, I was getting in late Saturday night. And so, no matter how much meditation I did, it really didn't matter. Like Saturday was like, I'm like, remember everything you learned, and it's like, no, so, you know how it is. So all that to say is, I'm just so unbelievably thrilled to be here with you today. I'm thrilled that everything, lined up for me to make it home on time. So thanks. Thanks, the universe. And in that, I'm so honored to share Mother's Day with you. Happy Mother's Day to all of you. And I want to acknowledge that, for every single one of us in this room, there are unique stories that we all have. We all have different types of relationships with our earthly mother. Maybe for some of us, there's a difficult relationship or a complicated relationship. Maybe you've lost your mother, and maybe you have a complicated relationship with being a mother or not being a mother. There are also so many variations and versions of what it can look like to be a mother or to embody a mothering spirit, even if you're not, physically, biologically a mother. So we want to acknowledge all those experiences, and at the same time, we also want to kind of point our gaze to this sense that we are all children of a greater mother. We might say the divine mother, or we might look at the earth and realize that we all come from and are birthed by something so much bigger than us. And at the same time, we also all come into the world through the physical process of birth. And so today, for Mother's Day, what I want to do is I want to take a look at this divine and sacred and mysterious aspect of what it means to be human, with the help of someone who has spent their life's work really tuning into and being really intimately knowledgeable about this part of life. A couple months ago, I had the honor of meeting someone who is coming to our community for the first time and has now become a part of our community, named Margo. And the first time I met Margo, she said that she was a midwife. And instantly, I could just see this moment right here and the opportunity to really get to learn more about what her experience has been. And then in the time since then, I've also learned that Margo is a podcaster, that Margo has helped produce a documentary about the process of birth, and Margo is also the co-founder of an organization called Indie Birth, which provides resources and coaching and community for midwives all around the world. So we have the honor of learning about this wonderful, sacred, beautiful practice and kind of this. I don't even know what to call it. It's more than a job, right? It's something. It's so ancient and so beautiful. It's been with us for thousands and thousands of years, and it still continues today. So, so excited to hear from her. Would you welcome Margo Nelson to the stage? Is that the Stanley Cup?
It is.
Okay.
I've joined the Stanley
There you
Cup
go.
Club.
We're not officially. I'm gonna have to bleep that out, or else we're gonna get some kind of Well, thank you so much for being here. And I wonder, for many of us, for some of us, we might think of the idea of a midwife as something that was more prominent before modern science, modern medicine, and so there might be people in this room who don't fully understand what a modern day midwife does, what it looks like, and I would love if you could share with us just what that is, what your role would be in the birthing process, and how the kind of coaching that you might provide.
Yeah, sure. It's kind of a can of worms to talk about what modern midwifery is and what it looks like. There's so many. Oh, better? Yeah? Okay. yeah, I was just saying it's kind of a can of worms because the way that modern midwifery looks is really varied. There's a million different ways that it can look. I am a home birth midwife and what someone would call a direct entry midwife, which means I didn't go to nursing school. I learned directly through experience. I apprenticed with a midwife in Northern Arizona for 5 years before going out on my own, and I also did like didactic academic kind of learning as well online. So there's been a lot of change in what the word midwife means in the last 100 or so years. Midwife used to mean kind of what I just described, someone who learned in the community with someone else and then practiced in the community. Now there's, like I said, there's kind of a couple different pathways into it. Some midwives attend hospital births, some attend home births like me, and then some kind of do both. But yeah, it's what it looks like for me is I typically work with women even before they get pregnant. I do preconception and fertility work as well. But for sure, once they know they're pregnant, I can do all the prenatal care with them, the birth at their house, and then 6 weeks or 8 weeks, depending, of care afterwards for both mom and baby.
What was the journey of life for you that kind of led you to this?
Yeah. It's a story I've told so many times, and it's always different, though, and it's like, what's going to come out of my mouth today? Yeah, so I went to school. I went to college in Flagstaff at NAU. My undergraduate degree is in sociology and women's and gender studies. And I was sort of on track to do something totally different. I was in grad school for a semester, studying intimate partner violence and specifically doing fatality review, which is really, really heavy stuff, and policy work around all of that. And I realized partway through my very first semester in grad school that that was not the path for me, and I was going to need to figure something else out. So I know when we had talked before this, I shared that in my 4 years of studying women's studies, we didn't talk about birth once in the 4 years. We didn't talk about mothering, we didn't talk about birth, we didn't talk about breastfeeding, we didn't talk about pregnancy, right? And so that was really striking to me now, especially in retrospect. And there had been one other student who, in my capstone, she did her project on sort of like the politics around birth, specifically in Flagstaff. And at the time, and she was a doula, which a doula, if you don't know, which most people don't, is sort of like a birth coach. So someone who does like physical, emotional, educational support for women during pregnancy and birth and the postpartum. So like a mini midwife, doesn't do all the more medical stuff. So this woman had been a doula, and she did her project on the fact that, and I'm going to throw some jargon around, VBACs were not allowed at the hospital in Flagstaff at the time. And a VBAC is a vaginal birth after a cesarean. So the policy was once a cesarean, always a cesarean, which was kind of, even at that time, which was in 2010, it was already outdated, but it was still the policy at the hospital. And so women were wanting to try to have vaginal births at the hospital, and they were being told they weren't allowed. And so that really was interesting to me. That was the only time we talked about birth, and it was another student talking about it in my senior year at NAU. And so in this sort of identity crisis, what should I do with my life moment the following fall, that woman came to mind and that story came to mind. And I was like, maybe I should explore that. What is a doula? So I remember sitting at my very old, crappy Dell laptop in my house that I shared with a million people and Googling what is a doula? What is a midwife? And just going down the rabbit hole. And I went to campus, I think probably the next day, and checked out every book they had about birth and midwifery. And I read a book called Spiritual Midwifery, which is sort of, it's a very popular book in the in the home birth world. It's written by this lady who is a hippie who sort of taught herself how to be a midwife on a commune and like with a bunch of other people and like some consultation from a local doctor, but basically taught herself. And she's sort of like considered the mother of the modern midwifery movement that was in the 60s, 70s. Her name's Ina Mae Gaskin, and she lived on The Farm, if people are familiar with it. It's an intentional community in Tennessee. So I read that, and I was like, yeah, this is cool. Like, she was talking about psychedelics and how trippy these births were, and just really interesting stuff, and how amazing these women were. And I was like,
don't mix the two necessarily, you know.
Right. And I was like, heck yeah, I want to learn more about this. And so this is turning into the long version. I didn't give you the full version when we talked. I was on campus with my then boyfriend, who's now my ex-husband. And we were on campus for like a environmental ed kind of presentation, and there was free food. So we went and ate a bunch of free food before this talk, and I was like really sick. I was like, I ate way too much of this free food, and I was like, I think I'm gonna throw up. We need to leave. And so on the way out, I literally like bumped into this woman that I often babysat for, like running out because I thought I was gonna hurl. I bumped into this lady, and she was like, hey, how are you? It's been a little while since we talked. And so I was, instead of being like, I'm gonna puke, I need to leave, I just kind of like tried to get it over with. And I was like, I don't know, I think I'm gonna quit grad school and I kind of want to become a midwife. Thinking, I don't know why, just in a kind of like panic. And she was like, oh, that's so cool, you should meet my midwife. And I had no idea that this woman who I had babysat for had used a midwife and had had 2 home births. And so she gave me the name of her midwife who lived in Sedona. And I would never, ever, ever have looked for a midwife in Sedona. I thought Sedona was just where very old retired people lived and no one was having babies there. Like that was I was, in Flagstaff, the only time I'd ever been to Sedona, that was the impression I got. So I wouldn't have thought that there would be a midwife, if that makes sense, serving this little tiny town. So it was very serendipitous. She told me her name. I went home on the same old laptop, looked up her name, and her site popped up, and it was Red Rock Midwifery, and her logo was a red woman symbol, sort of like slightly leaning. And I had just gotten this tattoo. I don't know if people can see it. It is a red woman symbol, slightly leaning, that same year for my 21st birthday. It was my first tattoo. And I just had this like full body chills moment of like, whoa, this is crazy. And so that woman's name is Marin, and she is now my very best friend and my business partner. So she and I run Indie Birth together. And I've been to 5 of her births, and she has been to both of mine. So we have midwifed each other at a total of 7 births and also through 3 losses. So, yeah. So that's how it all started.
And, having this exploration into this whole other world, and, you also get to bring that into your own life. So as a mother, how has going down this road impacted your own experiences?
Yeah, hugely. I guess without getting like too deep into my like medical history, I'll just say that I had both my kids at home, sort of, I like to say, against all odds. And it felt really important to me for a variety of reasons, both, health reasons and political reasons and spiritual reasons. And I likely would not have ever found a midwife who would actually help me because of some of my history. So I've had on and off like high blood pressure since I was like 15. And that's like a very hard no in the midwifery world, which we could certainly talk about. Midwifery has, especially over the last 50 years, become really highly regulated and sort of has been subsumed underneath like a very patriarchal structure. So that there are rules like the one in Flagstaff, right? Like no VBACs. Midwives until a few years ago also weren't allowed to attend VBACs at home. So just a lot of telling women what they can and can't do with their bodies, and then telling midwives what they can and can't do as midwives. And so Marin is probably the only midwife in the country who would have been willing to help me. So that like serendipitous bumping into somebody like totally changed my life. And like I said, in addition to having high blood pressure, which is its own whole like risk out, with my daughter, I think we counted, because I did have her in Oak Creek Canyon, if people know the road between Flagstaff and Sedona. She was born at the Rainbow Trout Farm. They have these really cute, like super cool retro trailers, and that's what we rented and we were living in at the time. So she is my little rainbow trout, I like to joke. But at the time, I counted, and I think, if she had been licensed, which is a whole nother conversation, which we can totally have, she would have been breaking 9 different midwifery rules in order to help me. I was in labor for almost 3 days. And I pushed for like almost 10 hours to get her out of me. We were very close to going to Flagstaff to get help. We were like kind of at the 11th hour. And then she was born. So I'm so grateful for her patience, the way that she trusted me to make my own choices, follow my own intuition, all of the things. It absolutely changed my life. And I have nothing against hospital births or interventions or technologies. I think it's really cool that we live in a time where we have access to all of those things. It's just approaching it in a mindful way that understands kind of how it impacts us on every level that I advocate for. Yeah.
And I imagine through the countless births that you've been a part of, that certainly you've seen all types of experiences, maybe some particularly difficult ones. What has that taught you? What have you experienced and seen in that realm?
Yeah, I'm still, in the world of midwifery, considered kind of a baby midwife. Like I've only been to, and people will be like, I've only been to about 130 births. So that's still like pretty green, because I had 2 children also in the mix, and really liked working with small amounts of people, like 1 or 2 births per month when I was actively doing it. So yeah, it's hard to pick from like all of those, like which lessons to share. But since I brought it up, I guess, like the fact that I had a really long first birth, I really give credit again to the midwife that I had, who's my business partner and best friend, but I also give a lot of credit to the women that I got to see do something similar. I had been to other births where women labored for 3, 4, or 5 days, on and off, sometimes not straight, right? Maybe they get a night off of sleep or something, but just the tenacity of women, I feel like I really leaned on during my own birth, right? Like if I hadn't seen that with my own eyes, I don't know that I would have believed it was possible. And so I think that's something that's really been taken away from women in the last 100 years. Like birth used to be a social event. So like when we look at the history of birth, there's an era called the era of social birth, where typically a woman would go into labor, and the women of the community would be told, and 5 to 7 of them would come. Maybe one of them was the midwife, who was kind of like known for doing that. But the other people also would have gone to many births, starting from maybe age 11, 12, like when they went through puberty themselves. So women were often seeing a variety of births before they had their own. And so that's the hardest part about being a midwife. Well, maybe it's not the hardest part, but one of the hard parts about being a midwife right now is most women that I work with have never been to a birth. And so same with breastfeeding. Breastfeeding is, of course, natural and all the things, but it's actually a motor skill that we learn through observation. So when we don't see other women doing it, we also have a harder time doing it ourselves. And I would argue birth is much the same. So not having like a social context around like what we believe about it. So I feel like the spiritual aspect of birth has largely been stripped away as more medical advancements, and as medicine has kind of taken on more of the responsibility around birth.
You mentioned the spiritual aspect, and I think for me, whenever we look at something that is this universal human experience, though we all have these individual and unique aspects to them, but there are things that are universal throughout humanity. And this is one of those just incredibly universal things. So I'm curious, like, when you look at sort of the spirituality, the spiritual aspects, maybe the spiritual insights that really can apply to people of, any gender too. What are some of those that you've pulled from this?
Totally. I think at the root of it, like, birth is transformational, and it's a rite of passage, and we all go through times of transformation and rites of passage. It's just like a really, like, super, it's like, do people have Instapots? Yeah, it's like that. It's like birth is the Instapot version of life. So you see,
I think we used to say, like, pressure cooker, and now we've changed
cooker.
to Instapot.
That's right.
I love it.
That's right.
I'm not going to say pressure cooker anymore.
Never again. This is an Instapot.
That was a very Instapot situation.
This is a definite Instapot situation. That's funny. So I think what's really cool about it is you get to see, women go through this Instapot moment where, like, all of the stuff or some of the stuff kind of comes forth. So it's really similar. I have not a lot of experience with psychedelics, but the people I know and love in my life who do often talk a lot about the similarities between psychedelic experiences and birth and death. Like, all of those things kind of have very similar patterning and stages and phases. And so, you see, it's really amazing such an honor to witness women facing those things, whether they verbalize it and sort of make it more concrete or not. Like, you can see, like, the struggle of going from maiden to mother, right? And, like, what does that mean for me as a human? And then just, like, women in this totally altered state of consciousness, which happens because, like, if we want to get sciencey about it, the reason that happens physiologically is there's, like, an enormous amount of endorphins that are running through their body, and other hormones too. It's like the ultimate runner's high. And so they literally, their brain is being bathed in all these hormones, and so they're, like, in another state, which I would argue, like, is connected with the divine, because it's such a big task to be bringing this new life through into this plane that you kind of can't be just, like, in your normal everyday mode. And I think that also is what gets taken away from women in our culture currently is, which I have no judgment about how people want to approach it on an individual level, but on, like, the social scale, there's this idea that, less pain is better, just get the epidural or just do the surgery. Like, why would you go through that when they're missing the context around, like, to do that, to labor and to experience this flood of hormones and this altered state of consciousness and this huge transformation, like, that process brings you to the other side and changes the way that you mother. And so the process isn't insignificant. It's there for a reason. It's kind of built in a way that, is important for, I think, all of us as humans. Yeah.
I love you said kind of moving from maiden to mother. Mm-hmm. I feel like for all of us, there are experiences that we have in life where it's a before and after. It's like we were one person, and then we go through an experience, and at the end of it, we are, we're someone different. We begin as a caterpillar, and we're a butterfly on the other side, and we all experience that. And so I'm curious, because I imagine that some of the same sort of coaching and comforting and mothering that you do in that space, I think could honestly translate into, if I were to be just in a place in life where I was just experiencing big transition, and I feel like maybe an idea or a sense of self is birthing in me, I would still come to you and go, hey, treat me like I'm, like I'm birthing. What would you tell me? Right?
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. So, like, when we had talked before, I used that phrase, mothering the mother. Like, that's what midwives do.
This is a picture of you doing that.
Oh, there's me. And that woman was becoming a mother for the first time. I just showed her video yesterday in a class, actually. It's really good. What was your question?
Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Okay, mothering the mother. So, yeah, feeding people, hydrating them, making sure they pee. She's on a toilet in this photo. We call it the labor throne because a lot of babies are born next to a toilet. And yeah, just emotionally supporting and holding space, like midwifery school. Like I run a midwifery school. It's almost 2 years long. We cover a lot of ground in terms of textbooks and complications and labs and like all the things, right? But at the end of the day, like this is the job, helping somebody hold their hair back if they're gonna puke. This lady puked all over me. And refilling the birth pool because it gets too cold, and just taking care of them and helping them remember like they're safe, if they are, of course, which most of the time they are, saying, you're safe, like I'm here. It's going to take the time it takes, which going back again to this kind of other way, this more, we call it like the technocratic model of birth, where it's like, let's just get this done as fast as possible, and there's an easier way. Why would we go the hard way when there's an easier way? And it reminds me of like my own kids. When they're going through something big, there is that impulse, like, oh, if I could just make this better, that'd be great. But like the process itself is important to their development and their growth. And so, yeah, resisting the urge to just make it easier for someone, because it's also kind of not possible, and it cheats them out of figuring it out for themselves too. Yeah.
It reminds me of that idea that just showing up and being there for people, like you said, feeding, hydrating, comforting, that can be the most powerful thing that we ever do for another person. Yeah. And it's having an eye to recognize, oh, this person is, again, regardless of gender, regardless of life situation, we all go through birth processes as human beings. And just recognizing that in other people and showing up in that way. That's really beautiful.
Yeah.
What about the experiences of the fathers?
Yeah, I haven't done that. I have not been a father, so I don't personally have that experience. Like we had kind of talked about, there's been a huge shift, like some definite like pendulum swinging in the last 100 years. There was obviously the era, if people are familiar with twilight sleep births, where women were like knocked unconscious for the birth. No, this is new info. Very interesting. You should totally read about it. I'm sure all of us have ancestors who this happened to. So women would not remember the experience, but it wasn't like they were calm. They would be like really agitated, and it was kind of scary to see. So men weren't allowed. That was kind of like the origin of men not being allowed in the room. And then there was this move back to like, oh, now men are allowed in the birth room again, and dad's cutting the cord and all the things. And there was something called the Bradley method, if people have heard of that. It's husband-coached childbirth. One of the methods, I think that was probably like the 70s or 80s. Don't quote me on that. But this idea like, oh, we can get men like involved again. And now I think we are seeing a settling somewhere in the middle, where it's like, depends on the man and the relationship and the partnership and what the mom wants. So like when I work with women, that's the conversation we have, is like, how do you see this going? What's your partnership been like in that way? And most of the women that I work with, I don't know if this is just something about me, but that they're attracted to, but they often are like, I want him there, but I really want women supporting me through this process. And so that's usually how it looks. I certainly have a lot of dads that catch the baby, but it's their own process too. And this is a question that we wrestle with. My friend Marin, her husband, who has 10 children, they have 10 children. So he's done this 10 times, and he has some really cool resources out there about like what it means to him and how it's evolved over the course of these 10 births. He did the whole like hands off, wasn't really involved the first time, then was super involved the next few times, and then realized like, oh, actually the best thing I can do is just make space, hold space for her and the women to do it. So I don't know, there's a lot of different ways it can look. And I think it absolutely is a transformational process for men as well, of course, to become fathers. It's something I'm less of an expert in. Yeah, so, and I think there's a lack of support and knowledge and like cool resources out there around that. So
I can imagine it's a huge, a letting go and a surrender, because it can be difficult to watch your partner go through something really, painful, and sometimes there's this desire to come in and fix, right? And so I imagine it can be a difficult and yet beautiful experience to trust the process.
Yes, yeah, it's definitely life-changing for a lot of the men that I've worked with. I showed a video yesterday in a class I taught too. He's this really, really super cool, very Minnesotan guy, because I practiced in Minnesota, and he's wearing like a concrete hat, like concrete flooring business hat. Like, I think it's where he worked. In the birth video, he's got his like concrete hat on, and the baby comes out, and he goes, "That is so cool." And this guy was really cute, and he told me, many times, he's like, "I've been at the bar playing darts, and I've been telling every guy I know about how cool home birth is," and so it was just like totally life-changing, for him, and I've seen that a lot of times. The dad at this birth was one of like the more hands-on dads I've seen, and he was just like right there and was so stoked. And he kept telling her, "You're crushing it," as she was pushing the baby out. It was really cute. So I was like, not quite the right words, but the energy was right. And it was really sweet. So yeah, it can look a lot of different ways.
So you've immersed yourself in this world of, there's such a beautiful appreciation of the divine feminine and our bodies and our connection to something greater. There's so much to this. I'm just curious how this has affected just your own spiritual outlook. How has this informed your journey in life?
Yeah, absolutely. How to sum it up? I think the word that I keep using is mystery. When I came into wanting to learn midwifery, I was so excited to read the textbooks. They're like thick, and they tell you all about like the bones of the pelvis and the cardinal movements of the baby, so the way that the baby moves through the pelvis. And I'm really type A and kind of like a perfectionist, and was like, I'm going to know everything there is to know about birth. It's going to be really cool. And so that's kind of where it started. And, I was super excited to see women like in their power. That was what I was really wanting to see in this lifetime, and I've gotten that. But what I think has changed as I've been to more births and then had my own experiences and then been to more births is like all the stuff in all the textbooks is like 1% of what we could know about the process. And we as humans really like to pretend like we know more about something than we do. For example, we still don't know what starts labor. We have no idea. It's probably a factor, like many things kind of coming together in this symphony, like a sign from the baby releasing special proteins from their lungs, and a sign from the mom's cervix that it's ripe enough, and like the moon is full. Like, we don't know. And so there's this like, I watched Baby Story a lot growing up on TLC, where they'd show birth videos, right? So I was steeped in that as well, and it's like, oh, well, if this X happens, we do this. Or we're trying to like make an algorithm for birth, and we're trying to make it very black and white. And if someone's blood pressure is above 140/90, like, no good. Or, if the baby is 1 percentile smaller than they're supposed to be, no good, right? So there's a lot of pathologizing, a lot of like trying to control and make sense of something that ultimately is so mysterious. Like, I have seen really weird, magical things happen that have no explanation. And, it's written off as like, oh, that must have been, maybe someone misinterpreted what was happening. Like, women will say, for example, like women will go into labor and they'll be 3 centimeters dilated, and then they'll have their baby like 10 minutes later. And it's like, that's not supposed to be possible. Or I also co-wrote a book, and this story is in the book, and I think I shared this with you. There was a first-time mom who, she She was like, I think I may be in labor. Like, it was really unclear, and it's usually pretty clear when someone's like in labor enough for me to be there. And so I was like, well, I haven't brought you over your birth pool. I do a lot of water births. And so I'll bring it over in case you need it. And that way I can sleep longer and you can just do the birth pool thing till it's really time. So I brought her over the birth pool after I was at dance class. I was like so she called me. I went through the whole dance class because I was like, that lady's not in real labor. Brought her the birth pool and was just kind of hanging out. And I was like, yep, you're definitely like in early labor, but it's probably going to be tomorrow. And then what was I doing? I don't know why I was hanging out another couple minutes. She was in kind of a unique relationship situation, so I just wanted to make sure she was okay, I guess. And then as I was like about to leave, she was like, I think it's coming out. And I was like, excuse me? So I like ran outside to my car where my birth bags were and ran inside, and the baby came out like 5 seconds later after like, seemingly not anywhere close to giving birth. So, and I mean, there's like a million other examples, births where I'm like, the baby's coming out head down. Now they're coming out butt first. Or, and just women like overcoming things that seem like they shouldn't be able to be overcome, or doing things that are impossible. And so it's just really how it's affected my spirituality. Has just given me a lot of humility, like as a human being and as a midwife. Like I make sure when I work with people that they know all of this. Like there's stuff I know, and there's a lot I don't know and that we don't have control over. And I also have seen really cool like lessons get brought up for people that obviously were needed. So even someone who really wanted that home birth, like a natural birth with no meds, who ends up having a cesarean, a few years later usually come back and say, wow, I really needed that experience. It helped me in X, Y, and Z ways. So even when we think we know what we want, or like what the goal is, like sometimes the universe just has other plans that make way more sense. So I've let go of a lot of that, trying to control the outcome for people and just sort of try to hold, keep them as safe as we can and honor their intuition, because at the end of the day, I've seen that that's the most important thing, that women are made to feel powerful and like they have autonomy and are responsible for their own lives, and the outcome is less important, which, I think applies to my own life too.
Can we all thank Margo for sharing? There's so much to digest there. So I just honestly want to just take a moment, and if you're comfortable, if you want to just close your eyes, and I just want to take a couple breaths together and reflect on this idea of motherhood, how it shows up in your life, what images come to mind, people, the love, and just sit in that for a moment. Gratitude for the people who have shown up in our lives, who've mothered us. And if you feel comfortable placing your hand on your heart and reflecting all the times that you've mothered yourself when you needed it. And placing our attention on this planet that nourishes us, that's given birth to us and provides for us daily with the food and the clean water that nourishes our body. When you're comfortable, you can open your eyes. Thank you all for joining us here today. We're so grateful that you chose to spend your Mother's Day morning with us. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will see you next week.
I meant to give a shout out to my mom as well, who's here with me today. She very much was responsible, I think, for me not being scared of birth. I think the stories we're told are so important. And I was always told, it's not that big of a deal. You can do it. And so I think that's very different than women who are told horror stories. The mind is so powerful. So thank you, Mom.